The queen's fingers closed around the cold, glass vial, empty save for a few crystalline drops clinging to the inside. It had rolled from the shadows beside the king's immense bed, coming to rest against the toe of her slipper. The scent of valerian and something darker, something metallic, ghosted up from its open mouth. In the moonlit silence of his chambers she had never been invited to. Enter the emptiness of the vial echoed like a scream. A soft, broken sound escaped her lips, not a sob, but a quiet expulsion of the last vestige of hope she hadn't even known she was still clutching. For 365 nights, she had stood outside this door, a ghost in her own palace, listening to the rustle of sheets, the murmur of courtesans, the king's low, indifferent dismissal of them. For 365 nights, she had returned to her own cold rooms. The bond in her chest, the mate bond, he publicly denied and privately ignored a constant aching bruise. He hadn't taken a sleeping draught to find rest. He had taken it to ensure he would not feel her. Not the pull of the bond, not the whisper of her presence in the adjacent wing, not the silent, screaming need of his own destined queen. Her hand trembled. The glass was slick against her skin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The door behind her swung open on silent, well-oiled hinges. Aeliana did not startle. A queen, even a rejected one, did not startle. She simply turned, the vial hidden in the folds of her silver-threaded dressing gown, her face a mask of composed moonlight and shadow. King Kaelen stood in the doorway, a silhouette of towering, lethal grace. He was not dressed for sleep. Black leather trousers, a linen shirt open at the throat, boots still dusty from the training yards. His scent pine and frost and alpha power flooded the room, making the bond in her chest clench like a fist around her heart. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept over her, missing nothing. Her bare feet on the cold stone, the undone braid of her midnight hair, the violation of his space. Aeliana. Her name was a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. You are far from your quarters. She lifted her chin. You were not in the council hall. You were not in the war room. The sentries said you had retired. Her voice was steadier than she felt, a quiet river over a jagged rock. A matter of state required your attention. One dark brow arched. State matters do not typically chase a king to his bedside wife. The title was a deliberate barb, a reminder of the political union that was a cage for them both. He stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. The space, already vast, seemed to shrink to the distance between them, a canyon of silence and unsaid things. What is it you require, as if she were a petitioner. As if the soul-deep ache between them was a trivial list of wants. She could show him the vial. She could hold it up and let the pale moonlight glint off its cruel emptiness. She could ask why, in 1,000 different ways. But the set of his jaw, the cold distance in his gaze, the way his powerful body was held, not in relaxation, but in readiness for battle, for dismissal, told her the truth. It would not matter. Her hurt would be another weakness for him to disdain. So she buried the evidence of her heartbreak deeper into her palm, letting the glass bite into her skin. The emissary from the southern pack, she said, clinging to the fabricated duty. He seeks clarification on the trade routes through the silver wood. The agreement stipulates your signature upon the lunar zenith. It is tonight. Kaelen watched her, his gaze a physical weight. He could smell lies. Every alpha of his line could. He could surely scent the salt of her wounded pride, the bitter tang of her despair. Yet he merely walked to the carved table near the fireplace, pouring a measure of amber liquor into a crystal glass. The southern pack can wait. The zenith will come again. They have waited through 2 cycles already. Their patience wears thin, and with the border skirmishes in the east. You think I am unaware of my kingdom's tensions? He did not raise his voice. He never did. It was flat, controlled, utterly devoid of the fire she sometimes dreamed she saw banked in his eyes. It was the voice that addressed his generals, his adversaries, the voice that addressed her. I think, Aeliana said, the words slipping out edged with a frost she did not intend, that sometimes the view from the throne obscures the cracks in the foundation. He stilled, the glass halfway to his lips. Slowly, he turned his head. The firelight caught the sharp angle of his cheekbone, the faint silver scar that bisected his brow, a mark from a challenge years before she was his. Before she was anything to him at all. You speak of cracks, my queen. Enlighten me. My queen, not Aeliana, never mate. The bond throbbed, a dull, insistent pulse of wrongness. It was a living thing inside her, this connection, and it reached for him constantly, a vine straining for the sun, only to be met with a wall of glacial ice. She took a shallow breath, the air in the room suddenly too thick with his presence and her own pain. The Southern Alpha believes the delay is a sign of disrespect, a prelude to revoke terms. He whispers to the Western clans, "Your focus elsewhere is noted." She did not look at the bed. She did not have to. My focus, Kaelen said, setting the glass down with a precise click, is where it must be. On securing a kingdom that was left to me fractured and bleeding, on alliances that require more than signed parchment. He took a step toward her, on ensuring that the line of succession is not threatened by a bond that complicates more than it cements. The words were arrows, each finding their mark with practiced, brutal accuracy. The line of succession, their lack of an heir. The bond that complicated things, he spoke of it as a political nuisance, a faulty treaty. Not as the sacred, searing truth of their souls it was supposed to be. It only complicates because you refuse it, she whispered, the mask cracking. She hadn't meant to say it. The sight of the vial had scooped out her defenses, leaving her raw. He was before her then, not with alpha speed, but with a predator's silent, inevitable approach. The heat of him radiated against the chill of her gown. She could see the darker ring of gray around the storm of his irises, the faint pulse at the base of his throat. Her own blood roared in her ears, the mate bond singing a frantic, desperate note at his proximity. And what would accepting it solve, Aeliana? His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated in the space between their bodies. Would it fill our granaries? Would it sharpen our blades? Would it silence the nobles who look at you and see only a stolen princess from a conquered territory, a forced peace bride and not a true queen? Each question was a lash. The oldest wound, the deepest cut, her origin, the peace of Willow's End, her hand given as a spoil of war to the victorious young king to bind her people's surrender. She was the living symbol of his dominance, and her unwanted mate bond was a cosmic joke he resented. Tears threatened, hot and humiliating. She locked them away, building her walls from ice and iron. It might, she said, her voice trembling only slightly, give you a consort who is not slowly dying of loneliness in the heart of your own castle. The moment the words left her, the air changed. The careful, controlled distance in his eyes flickered. Something raw and dangerous bled through not anger, but something akin to shock, or perhaps recognition. His gaze dropped to her lips, then to the hand clutched at her side. He leaned in, just a fraction, and she felt his breath ghost across her cheek. Loneliness is a luxury. He breathed, the words almost soundless. One I cannot afford, and one you should have learned to bear by now. He straightened, pulling the crushing weight of his presence back. The moment shattered. The fleeting glimpse of something else was gone, buried again beneath the king. Give the Southern emissary my assurances. The roots are his. The document will be signed before dawn. You may go. Dismissed. Like a servant. Like a ghost. Aeliana did not curtsy. She simply turned, her bare feet silent on the stone, the vial a secret, burning weight in her hand. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her, colder than the castle stones. And Aeliana? She paused, not looking back. Do not wander these halls at night again. The guards have orders to protect the king's privacy. Even from his queen. She slipped out, the door closing behind her, sealing her into the vast, empty silence of the corridor. Only then, in the merciful dark, did she open her hand. The vial had left a perfect, crescent-shaped indentation in her palm. She looked at it, this small, brutal proof of his rejection, and felt the last fragile thread of something expectation, perhaps finally snap. In the cold solitude, a new, quiet fire began to kindle in the ashes of her hope. It was not the warm flame of desire, but the clear, blue flame of resolve. If loneliness was a luxury, then so was devotion. And she was done paying a price for a bond that only she seemed to feel. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The cold of the corridor seeped through the thin soles of her slippers, a tangible echo of the chill now rooted in her bones. Aeliana walked, not toward the royal wing where her lavish, lonely apartments awaited, but down a narrower, older staircase that spiraled into the heart of the castle. The vial was still clutched in her hand, a shard of ice against her skin. She did not let it go. She moved without conscious thought, guided by a deep, instinctual pull to the only place in this stone prison that had ever offered a semblance of solace. The Royal Archive was a cavernous, multi-leveled library, a testament to centuries of shifter kings and queens. It was also largely forgotten, a scent of old parchment and dust overpowering the lingering traces of its few visitors. Here, among the silent, towering shelves, she was not the rejected queen. She was a reader, a scholar, a woman who could lose herself in histories and herbals, in epic poems and forgotten treaties. Here, the ache of the bond could, for a few precious hours, be muffled under the weight of other people's stories. Pushing open the heavy oak door, the familiar scent of vellum, beeswax, and slow decay enveloped her. A single low-burning lamp glowed on the central study table left by a scribe hours before. She made her way toward it, her gown whispering against the stone floor. She placed the empty vial on the polished wood. It sat there, innocent and damning, catching the lamplight. To not feel me, the thought was a fresh wound. She had studied mate bonds, devouring every text she could find in a desperate attempt to understand her own torment. The connection was meant to be a source of strength, a comfort, a tether. It was a sacred recognition by the moon herself. To chemically sever its awareness, even in sleep. It was a profound personal blasphemy. A soft, shuffling sound came from the shadows between two high shelves. Aeliana went still, her senses sharpening. It was not a guard. Their steps were heavier, their scent sharp with steel and oil. This was fainter, laced with the aroma of ink and aged wool. "Come out, Alara," Aeliana said, her voice soft but clear in the vast quiet. "I know it's you." A small, hunched figure emerged from the gloom. Alara, the head archivist, was a woman of indeterminate age, her hair a cloud of silver, her eyes magnified behind thick spectacles. She was also, though few knew it, a member of Aeliana's conquered people, the Sylvan, keeping their history alive in secret codices, tucked behind official records. "Your Grace," Alara murmured, her gaze flicking immediately to the vial on the table. Her wrinkled face did not change expression, but a knowing sorrow deepened the lines around her eyes. "You are abroad late. I could not sleep," Aeliana replied, the half-truth tasting like ash. She traced the rim of the glass with a fingertip. "Alara, in your studies, have you ever come across references to a bond being suppressed? Not just denied, but actively muted?" The old woman moved closer, her steps silent. She did not touch the vial, but her eyes studied it with academic intensity. "They're old tales," she said slowly, her voice a dry rustle of pages. "From before the Unification Wars, of alphas who took multiple mates for political gain, using tinctures to silence the clamor of unwanted bonds. It was considered a dark practice. An affront to the natural order." Her eyes lifted to Alina's. "The herbs required are rare, dangerous. They do not break the bond. They only poison the one who takes them, creating a numbness." A barrier? A barrier? He was poisoning himself to keep her out. The ache in her chest crystallized into something colder, harder. "Why?" The word escaped her, ragged and bare. "Why go to such lengths? He could simply continue to ignore me. The bond aches, but it is bearable. This is a declaration of war against fate itself." Alara's gaze was compassionate but unflinching. To ignore a bond requires constant, conscious effort. It is a battle fought every moment. A sleeping draft laced with blightroot and frost ivy. It is a surrender. A white flag raised to his own weakness. She paused, choosing her words with care. Perhaps the king fears that in sleep his control might slip, that the bond might speak to him. And he cannot allow that. The idea was a seismic shift. Aeliana had always perceived his rejection as strength, as cold, unwavering will. What if it was the opposite? What if this sleeping draft was not a shield against her, but a cage for himself? The possibility was as terrifying as it was alluring. It offered a sliver of hope where before there was none, and that was infinitely more dangerous. Before she could process it, the archive door groaned open again. Both women turned. Framed in the doorway was not a guard, but Lysander, the king's personal aide and cousin. Young, impeccably dressed, his handsome face was a mask of polite concern that never quite reached his calculating blue eyes. He carried the scent of night air and expensive wine. "Your Grace," he said, bowing with perfect, shallow courtesy. The king was concerned when he did not return directly to your chambers. He asked me to ensure you were well. Concerned. The word was a lie so blatant, it was almost an insult. Kaelen had sent a watchdog to ensure her compliance with his order. "I am well, Lysander," Aeliana said, her queen's mask sliding seamlessly back into place. She subtly swept the vial into the palm of her hand, hiding it once more. The archives offer a clarity the royal apartments sometimes lack. I was consulting the archivist on a point of history regarding the southern trade routes. Lysander's smile was thin. "Of course. The king's dedication to his duties is matched only by your own." His eyes swept the room, lingering on Alara, who had become very interested in a dusty folio. Still, the hour is late, and the castle is not without its shadows. "Allow me to escort you back." It was not a request. Aeliana inclined her head. "Thank you, Lysander." She turned to Alara, giving a slight formal nod. "Archivist. Your assistance, as always, is valued." Alara bowed deeply, her eyes downcast. "Your Grace." As Aeliana moved toward the door, Lysander falling into step just behind her, she felt the old woman's gaze on her back. A warning. A shared secret. The walk through the torch-lit corridors was silent but for the tap of Lysander's boots and the whisper of her gown. The presence of the king's cousin was a different kind of chill. Kaelen was a glacier immovable, honest in his coldness. Lysander was a serpent, smooth and ambiguous, his loyalty always in question. "The king plans a hunt tomorrow," Lysander said conversationally as they entered the grand gallery lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. "The stag of the Silverwood has been sighted, a significant omen for the coming season. A public hunt, a display of alpha prowess and royal tradition. Elena's role would be to stand on the viewing platform, beautiful and silent, a decorative piece." "I am aware," she said. "He has asked that you wear the diadem of moonstones," Lysander continued. "The one from your bridal trousseau. He believes it will resonate with the people. A symbol of unity, the diadem. A masterpiece of sylvan craftsmanship forced into the crown's treasury as part of the peace terms. To wear it was to wear her subjugation as a crown jewel." A fresh wave of humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over her. "I see," she managed, her throat tight. They reached the ornate doors of her apartments. Two stone-faced royal guards stood sentry. They did not look at her. "I will ensure the diadem is brought to your chambers at dawn," Lysander said, bowing again. "Rest well, your grace. The kingdom needs its queen-looking radiant." He left her there at the threshold of her gilded cage. She entered, the doors closing behind her with a sound of finality. Only in the overwhelming, perfumed silence of her rooms did she finally open her hand. She walked to the window, looking out over the moon-drenched kingdom that was her home and her prison. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she drew back her arm and hurled the tiny vial out into the night. She did not hear it shatter on the stones far below, but she felt the release in her soul. He wanted a barrier. He wanted a symbol. He wanted a queen of ice and stone. Very well, she thought, the new fire in her heart burning brighter, fueled by revelation and a deep, simmering anger. Let him have her. But as she turned from the window, the ghost of Alara's words echoed in the silent room. Perhaps the king fears that in sleep, his control might slip. Tomorrow at the hunt, she would not just wear the diadem. She would watch him, not as a wounded mate, but as a strategist. She would look for the cracks in the glacier. For the first time in a year, the bond in her chest felt less like a chain and more like a key. She just had to find the right lock. Dawn arrived not with gentle light, but with the clamor of the hunt. The royal courtyard teemed with noise and motion, the stomp of hooves, the jingle of harnesses, the low growls of shifters already half primed for the chase. The air was crisp, threaded with the scent of horse, leather, and the sharp, green promise of the forest. Aeliana stood on the raised stone viewing platform, a statue carved from morning frost. The moonstone diadem, cold and heavy on her brow, felt less like a crown and more like a brand. Its pale gems caught the weak sunlight, winking with a captured, lifeless glow. She had dressed in a gown of deep, forest green, a silent, subtle nod to her origins that none but Alara might recognize. It was armor, not finery. Below, Kaelen moved among his hunters and nobles. A king in his element. He wore hunting leathers, dark and supple, a heavy fur-lined cloak slung over his broad shoulders. He spoke to his captain, his gestures decisive, his profile sharp against the backdrop of the castle walls. He was the picture of untamed, focused power. The sleeping draft, the vial, the confession in the dark, they might have been a fever dream. But Aeliana watched him now with new eyes. She watched the way he stood, a fraction too rigid. She noted the slight tension in the line of his shoulders, as if he were holding something immense at bay. She saw how his gaze, sweeping the assembly, never once lingered on the platform where she stood. A deliberate avoidance or conscious effort? Lysander, mounted on a sleek gray mare, glided to the king's side, speaking words lost to the distance. Kaelen nodded, his expression unchanging, but a flicker of something impatience, irritation, passed over his face before it was smoothed away. The serpent and the glacier united in purpose. A horn sounded, a deep, resonant blast that silenced the courtyard. The stag of the Silverwood was more than prey. It was a living omen. Its capture symbolized the king's mastery over the wild, the land's blessing on his reign. Failure was unthinkable. Kaelen turned, his storm-gray eyes finally lifting to the platform. They found her, a green and silver figure against the gray stone. For a heartbeat, the distance between them vanished. His gaze was not indifferent. It was a collision. It was assessment, a stark, raw recognition that stripped away the layers of protocol and pretense. In that look, she saw not a king dismissing his queen, but an alpha seeing a fixed point in a shifting landscape. It was over in a second. He gave a single, curt nod and acknowledgement, a command, then swung onto his massive black stallion with effortless grace. The hunt erupted into motion, a river of horse, fur, and men pouring from the castle gates. The thunder of hooves faded, leaving a ringing silence in the courtyard. Her official duties complete, Aeliana should have returned to her chambers. Instead, she descended the platform steps, her guards falling into step behind her. "I will walk in the West Garden," she announced, her tone leaving no room for question. The gardens were a manicured illusion of wilderness, a place where she could breathe air not thick with stone dust and politics. She moved along a gravel path between skeletal rosebush, her mind churning. The intensity of Kaelen's final look replayed itself. "What are you hiding from, Kaelen? What do you fear so much that you would poison your own sleep?" "Your grace." The voice, soft and familiar, came from a secluded bower woven with dormant ivy. Alara stood there, a thick, leather-bound book clutched to her chest, pretending to examine a frostbitten herb bed. One of the guards shifted, but Aeliana raised a hand. "Wait here!" "I wish to speak with the archivist about the castle's medicinal gardens." She approached Alara, the crunch of gravel the only sound. When she was close enough, the old woman spoke without looking up, her voice a barely audible whisper. "I found it, the reference." "It is as I suspected, but worse." Her fingers tightened on the book. "The tincture of blightroot and frost ivy. It does not merely mute the bond. With prolonged use, it can cause a sundering. A psychic scar. It can make the bond feel like a wound of pure agony for the one taking it. The numbness is a lie. Underneath it is pain." He's not building a wall, Your Grace. He is sitting in a room on fire and pretending not to smell the smoke. The world tilted. Alina's breath caught. The cold morning air felt suddenly suffocating. Agony. He was in agony. Not from the bond's absence, but from its forced, poisoned presence. All this time, she had felt the ache of rejection, a steady, dull throb. Was he feeling a searing burn? Was his coldness not indifference, but a monumental effort to contain a scream? Why? She breathed, the question more desperate now. Why would he choose that? Alara's aged eyes met hers, filled with a profound and weary understanding. For the same reason kings have always done terrible things. Fear. The bond, if acknowledged, makes him vulnerable. To you, to your people who still whisper of rebellion, to his own court, who would see a mated king as emotionally compromised. He believes the pain is the price of the throne. She glanced toward the stoic guards, then back. There is more. The antidote, the cleansing, it is not a simple thing. It requires a catalyst. A moment of profound, unguarded emotional resonance between the bonded pair. A moment where the walls come down not by force, but by truth, Aeliana finished, the word a ghost on her lips. Alara nodded. Without it, the poison will slowly leach into his spirit. It will not kill his body. It will kill his ability to feel anything at all, even for his kingdom. A king becoming an emotionless shell, a bond turned into an instrument of slow death. The political stakes she had understood. This was a deeper, more intimate horror. Before she could respond, a new sound cut through the garden's stillness, not the returning hunt, but a rising commotion from the direction of the gatehouse. Shouts, the clash of steel, a roar that was distinctly bestial and filled with rage. Her guards snapped to attention, hands on their swords. Your Grace, we must return to the keep. But Aeliana was already moving, not toward safety, but toward the noise, a dreadful certainty pulling her forward. She gathered her skirts and ran, the guards cursing and rushing after her. The scene at the main gate was chaos. The hunt had returned, but not in triumph. Horses reared, eyes rolling in terror. Hunters were bleeding, some in human form, some limping on animal legs. In the center of the storm was Kaelen. He was on his feet, but barely. His cloak was gone, his leathers torn and slick with blood that was not all the stag's. A great gashing wound ran from his collarbone down his chest. But it was his eyes that froze her. They were wild, fully wolf, blazing with a feral gold-tinged light. He was snarling, a low, continuous rumble that vibrated in the very stones, holding at bay a circle of his own guards who approached him with the caution one would show a trapped predator. Back! He growled, the word mangled, almost unrecognizable. Do not touch me! Lysander was there, his face pale, shouting orders that no one heeded. The stag was a ruse, an ambush by the Shadow Fang clan. They were waiting in the grove, but Aeliana barely heard him. All she saw was Kaelen. And for the first time through the bond, she felt it. Not the usual dull ache, but a torrent. A cataclysm of pain, rage, and a terrifying, unraveling control. The sleeping giraffe's artificial barrier had been shattered by adrenaline, by injury, by raw survival instinct. The poison was still there, a corrosive undercurrent, but the bond itself was now wide open, screaming. He was losing himself. The pain of the wound, the shock of the betrayal, the violent surge of the unmuffled bond, it was too much. He was teetering on the edge of a full, feral shift, one from which the king might not return. Without thinking, without strategy, Aeliana stepped past her paralyzed guards. She walked into the deadly circle. A collective gasp went up. Your Grace, no! Lysander shouted. Kaelen's blazing wolf eyes snapped to her. The snarl deepened, a warning meant to send her fleeing. The bond between them howled with a confusion of impulses: protect, claim, push away, destroy. She stopped an arm's length from him. The scent of his blood, his fury, his unique pine and frost essence mixed with the metallic tang of poison filled her senses. This close, she could see the tremors running through his powerful frame, the struggle for mastery in his eyes. Kaelen, she said, his name not a title, but a command. Her voice was quiet, a clear stream cutting through the roar. He flinched as if struck. She did not reach for his wound. She did not touch him. She simply stood there, her green gown a stark contrast to the blood and dirt, her chin lifted, meeting the chaos in his eyes with a profound, unshakable calm. She opened herself, not with words, but through the bond, not pushing her longing at him, but offering a steady, unwavering anchor, a point of stillness in his whirling storm. I am here, the feeling resonated along the tether between their souls. You are not alone in this fire. His breath hitched. The feral gold in his eyes flickered, a war raging within. The snarl died in his throat, becoming a ragged, pained sound. The guards tensed, ready to pounce. Slowly, so slowly, the terrifying wildness in his gaze receded, not vanishing, but being forced back behind a wall of sheer, agonizing will. The human king fought his way to the surface, his eyes clearing to their stormy gray, now dark with pain and something else, a stunned, blazing recognition. He stared at her, chest heaving, blood dripping onto the cobblestones. The courtyard was utterly silent, every soul holding their breath. His bloodied hand rose, not to strike, not to push her away. It hovered in the air between them, trembling with the effort. Then his fingers brushed her cheek. The touch was shocking in its rawness, a bolt of lightning grounded in her skin. It was not a caress. It was a confirmation. A desperate, instinctual connection to the anchor she offered. A shudder racked his entire body. Aeliana, he gritted out, her name a confession and a ruin. Then his eyes rolled back in his head. His knees buckled. He collapsed forward, not onto the cold stone, but into her waiting arms. He was a dead weight of blood, leather, and shattered control. Aeliana staggered under the impact, her arms wrapping instinctively around his massive shoulders to keep them both from tumbling to the cobbles. The heat of him, the shocking solidity, the scent of his pain, it was overwhelming. The bond, now a shrieking, open channel, flooded her with a dizzying cascade. The searing bite of the claw wound, the deeper, sickening ache of the poison, and beneath it all, a yawning chasm of exhaustion, so profound it felt like death. Help him. Her voice, sharp with a command she had never used in this courtyard, cut through the frozen silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. They stared, stunned, at the rejected queen holding their fallen feral king. Then the world exploded into motion. His personal guards surged forward, prying him from her grasp with a roughness born of panic. She let them, her hands coming away slick and warm with his blood. They bore him away on a makeshift litter of cloaks and spears, a grim procession heading for the royal infirmary. The green of her gown was stained a brutal, rusting crimson. Lysander appeared at her side, his usual composure cracked. "Your Grace, you should not have. Be silent," she said, the words ice. She did not look at him. Her eyes followed the retreating form of her husband. The ghost of his touch still burned on her cheek. Aeliana, he had said her name like it was the last word in the world. She turned and walked toward the keep, the stunned crowd parting before her. Her guards followed, their earlier hesitation replaced by a new, watchful intensity. The queen had walked into the wolf's jaws and had not been bitten. Something had shifted in the kingdom's bedrock, and they had all felt it. She did not go to the infirmary. They would not allow her in. She went to his chambers. The two guards at his door different from her own crossed their spears as she approached. "No one is to enter, your grace. Orders of the royal physician. Step aside." Her tone was low, implacable. The blood on her dress was her authority. The guards exchanged an uncertain glance. The king's final public collapse in her arms was a detail not covered in their orders. One cleared his throat. "The physician said? The physician serves the crown," Aeliana interrupted, her gaze steady. "I am the crown. Step aside." Perhaps it was the blood. Perhaps it was the strange, regal fire in her eyes, so different from her usual quiet sorrow. Slowly, with a creak of protest, the spears uncrossed. She entered the room she had violated just the night before. It was now a place of chaos and medicine. The heavy drapes had been torn open, letting in the harsh daylight. The great bed was a tangle of bloodied linens. The royal physician, a thin, harried man named Alaric, and 2 assistants were bent over Kaelen's unconscious form, working frantically. The metallic scent of blood and the bitter aroma of poultices choked the air. Alaric looked up, his face paling when he saw her. "Your Grace." "This is no place. Report," she commanded, stopping at the foot of the bed. Her heart was a trapped bird in her chest, but her voice was calm. She forced herself to look at Kaelen. He was shirtless, the brutal gash from collarbone to sternum a livid, angry mouth against his pale skin. It had been cleaned and stitched with thick, black thread, but it still oozed. His chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. His face, even in unconsciousness, was a mask of strain, the muscles in his jaw tight, sweat beading on his brow. The wolf was close to the surface, fighting the weakness of the body. "The wound is deep, but not fatal if infection is kept at bay," Alaric said quickly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "The claw was clean. It is the fever that worries me. It burns too hot too fast. It is not natural." His eyes flicked to hers, then away, laden with meaning. He knew, perhaps not about the vial, but he knew the king's physiology was battling more than a physical injury. "The bond's poison?" The fire Alara had spoken of, now raging unchecked with his defenses down. "What do you need?" Aeliana asked. "Moonwort." "From the high northern crags. It is the strongest febrifuge we have for blood fevers of this nature. Our stores are depleted. A rider has been sent, but it is a 2-day journey. 2 days." She looked at the fevered tremors beginning to rack Kaelen's powerful frame. He did not have 2 days. The poison would cook him from the inside out. "There is moonwort in the sylvan cache," she said, the words leaving her lips before thought was fully formed. "In the old grove, east of the Willow's End boundary stone." Alaric stared. The sylvan cache, forbiddance, the medicinal stores of her conquered people. Hidden after the war, their locations a closely guarded secret. Possession of such knowledge was treason. "Your Grace," Alaric's voice was a whisper. "It is closer. A half-day's hard ride for a small, swift party." She turned from the physician's shocked face and addressed one of her guards who had followed her in. "Find Captain Rylan. Tell him to ready 3 of his most discreet men. They ride for the East Grove within the hour. They are to take nothing but the moonwort. No trophies. No sightings. On my authority." The guard, a man named Evander who had served her since her arrival, met her eyes. He gave a sharp, solemn nod. "It will be done, Your Grace." He departed at a run. Alaric was still gaping. The king, if he recovers. The political ramifications. "If he does not recover," Aeliana said, turning her gaze back to the suffering man on the bed, "there will be no politics. There will be war. And I will have need of that moonwort for the thousands who will follow him to the pyre." She stepped closer to the bedside, ignoring the physician's sputtered protests. "Leave us. Your Grace, I must monitor the fever. You will be right outside the door. I will call if he worsens. Now leave." The authority in her voice was absolute, forged in the crucible of the courtyard. After a final fearful look at his patient, Alaric gathered his assistants and retreated, closing the door softly behind him. Silence descended, broken only by Kaelen's ragged breathing and the crackle of the fire. Alone with him, the enormity of what she was doing crashed over her. Treason. Using Sylvan secrets to save the king who had broken her people. Her own heart was a battlefield of conflicting loyalties. She sat carefully on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. Up close, his pain was a physical force. She reached out a tentative hand, her fingers hovering just above his burning forehead. She did not touch him, but she opened herself to the bond fully, no longer just an anchor, but a conduit. The onslaught was immediate and brutal. It was not just the pain of the wound. It was the scorching path of the poison, a black river burning through the channels of his spirit. It was the echoing betrayal of the ambush the stag, a sacred hunt turned into a murder plot. And beneath it all, a vast, desolate loneliness so deep it dwarfed her own. The loneliness of a king who trusted no one, not even his own soul. Tears she had not shed for herself welled in her eyes for him. This was the cost of his throne. This was the man behind the glacier. Her hand lowered and her fingertips finally made contact with his skin. It was searing. A jolt went through her, through the bond a spark of awareness and the dark chaos of his fever. His head tossed on the pillow. A low groan escaped his lips. "Stop! Kaelen," she whispered. His eyelids fluttered. The stormy gray eyes were clouded with heat and delirium, but they found her. There was no recognition, only a primal, confused anguish. "Hurts. I know," she said, her voice thick. "I can feel it." His hand, lying limp on the coverlet, twitched. Then his fingers fumbled, searching, until they found hers and clutched them with a strength that was startling. It was not a romantic gesture. It was the grip of a drowning man. "The fire," he mumbled, his gaze drifting, saying things she could not. "In the bond it burns. I can't put it out. Confirmation." A dagger to her heart. Alara was right. He was in the burning room. "You don't have to put it out alone," she whispered, leaning closer, her free hand coming up to brush the sweat-damped hair from his forehead. This touch was deliberate, a comfort. "Let me in." Truly in. He stared at her, through her, the poison and the fever making him honest in a way he had never been while awake. "Dangerous," he rasped. "Weak." "Not weak," she said fiercely, the tears spilling over. "Never that. You are the strongest man I know, and the most stubborn fool. Let me help you carry it." A shudder racked him. His grip on her hand tightened impossibly, a lifeline. For a long moment he just stared, his breathing hitching. The bond between them trembled, the poisoned, fiery static clearing for a single crystalline second. In that second, she felt not the king, not the alpha, but Kaelen. The man beneath, weary, wounded, and so utterly alone it took her breath away. His lips parted. "Allie?" His voice broke. His eyes, clearing for a heartbeat, held hers with a vulnerability that shattered her completely. Then the fever surged back, swallowing the moment. His eyes rolled back and he fell into a deeper, more troubled unconsciousness, but his hand did not let go of hers. She sat there, imprisoned by his grip, her cheek resting against their joined hands, her tears soaking the linen. The outside world, the politics, the treason, the Shadowfang clan, Lysander's scheming fell away. There was only this, the burning king. The queen who finally understood the nature of the fire. And the fragile, terrifying bridge they had just built across the abyss, woven from blood, truth, and a touch that had finally meant something. This response is that I had generated for reference only. The moon was high when the door to the king's chamber whispered open. Aeliana, who had not moved from her vigil except to ease the cramps in her limbs, looked up from where she sat, Kaelen's hand still clasped in hers. It was Evander, her guard, his face grimed with dust and etched with exhaustion. In his hand was a small, wax-sealed clay pot. "The East Grove, your grace," he murmured, crossing the room. "We met no patrols." The cache was undisturbed. He placed the pot on the bedside table. His eyes flicked to the unconscious king, to their joined hands, and back to her face. There was no judgment, only a weary respect. "Alaric waits outside." "Thank you, Evander. Get some rest." "Speak of this to no one." He bowed and withdrew. She broke the seal on the pot. Inside was a dense paste of crushed moonwort, its scent sharp, green and cool, like the heart of a winter forest. It was a sylvan remedy, one her mother had used. The irony was a bitter tang on her tongue. She called for Alaric. The physician entered, his eyes widening at the sight of the pot. He did not ask how she had obtained it so quickly. The queen who commanded the courtyard and spoke of hidden caches was a new, formidable variable in his calculations. "Apply it," she ordered. Alaric set to work, carefully spreading the paste over the angry, inflamed wound. The effect was almost immediate. Kaelen's restless thrashing lessened. The terrifying, dry heat radiating from his skin began to recede, incrementally, as if a window had been opened in the burning room. The moonlight was fighting the physical fever. But Aeliana, through the bond, could still feel the deeper spiritual poise in the Black River, though its banks were no longer overflowing. As Alaric finished and withdrew, Kaelen's breathing deepened, settling into a rhythm that spoke more of natural sleep than fevered delirium. His grip on her hand, however, remained iron-strong. Fatigue, a heavy woolen blanket, settled over her. She could not leave, not while he held her, not while the bridge between them felt so perilously new. She shifted carefully, easing herself to lie in the coverlet beside him, still clothed in her blood-stained gown. It was an intimacy she had never dared imagine, lying beside her husband in his bed. There was no desire in it, only a profound, aching watchfulness. The heat of his body, now a more manageable warmth, seeped into her. The scent of pine, frost, blood, and moonwort wrapped around her. For the first time in a year, the constant, lonely ache of the bond was quiet, not gone, but transformed. It hummed now with a different frequency, a shared burden, a silent vigil. She must have slept. She woke to the sensation of being watched. The gray light of pre-dawn filtered through the windows. Kaelen was awake. His eyes were clear, the storm gray sharp and focused, though shadowed with pain and exhaustion. He was staring at their joined hands, his brow furrowed as if trying to decipher a complex treaty. Then his gaze lifted, traveling up her arm, over the ruined green silk of her sleeve, to her face. There was no anger, no cold dismissal, only a deep, unsettling scrutiny. Aeliana did not move. She did not pull her hand away. "The fever broke," she said, her voice sleep-roughened. He was silent for a long moment. His thumb moved, a barely perceptible stroke across her knuckles. A shiver, utterly traitorous, raced up her spine. "You are here," he said. His voice was raw, scraped bare from fever and disuse. It was not a question. It was a statement of profound fact. "You would not let go." His gaze dropped back to their hands, as if the sight confirmed something he had only dreamed in his delirium. "I remember," he paused, the words seeming to cost him. "The courtyard, you stood there, the bond was screaming. And you were quiet, her calm in his storm. It had been the only thing she could offer. The physician says the moonwort saved you from the blood fever," she said, deliberately steering toward safer, tangible ground. His eyes snapped back to hers. Alert now, the king reassembling himself piece by piece. "Moonwort. Our northern stores are 2 days away." She held his gaze, giving nothing away. "There are other sources." Understanding dawned, and with it, a flicker of something dangerous. Not anger, but a sharp, political alarm. "You used a sylvan cache." His fingers tightened around hers, not painfully, but with an intensity that stole her breath. "Do you understand what you have done? If it were discovered, it would be treason," she finished calmly. "And you would be dead, and the kingdom would be tearing itself apart over your corpse. The calculation was simple, Your Majesty. The title was a deliberate reestablishment of distance, a small shield." He flinched at it. He studied her face, the shadows under her eyes, the stubborn set of her mouth, the dried flecks of his blood on her collar. "You risked everything." It was not gratitude. It was awe and a kind of horrified respect. "You asked me to bear my loneliness," she said, the words slipping out before she could cage them. "I am learning, but I will not bear your death. Not when I can prevent it." The air between them grew thick, charged with all the things they were not saying. The vial, the poison, the burning room. His confession in the dark. Her hands shook slightly, and she knew he could feel it. He opened his mouth to speak, but a sharp, urgent knock shattered the moment. "Enter," Kaelen called, his voice regaining some of its command, though he did not release her hand. Lysander strode in, his usual polish slightly marred, his eyes taking in the scene. The queen in her stained gown on the king's bed, their joined hands, with a speed that missed nothing. His expression remained impeccably concerned. "Your Majesty, thank the moon you are awake. The healer said the crisis has passed." He bowed. "We have the survivors from the hunt in the lower cells. The interrogation has begun." The Shadowfang ambush was not opportunistic, it was planned. They knew the route. Kaelen's face hardened, the vulnerable man receding, the warlord rising. Who gave them the route? Lysander's gaze slid to Aeliana, then back. That is what we are determining. The information was closely held. Very few knew the precise location of the Stag's Grove. The implication hung in the air, toxic and silent. Aeliana felt a cold that had nothing to do with the morning. The very few would include the king, his captain, his most trusted advisors, and his queen, who had been briefed on all matters of state, including the hunt's traditional parameters. Kaelen's hand tightened around hers once, a quick, almost imperceptible pressure, before he finally let go. The absence of his touch felt like a wound. He pushed himself up against the headboard, ignoring the wince of pain the movement cost him. "I will see the prisoners myself," he growled. "Your Majesty, you are not strong enough," Lysander began. "I am strong enough," Kaelen cut him off, his voice a whip crack. He looked at Aeliana. "You will return to your chambers. Rest. You will be summoned to the council later today." It was the king speaking, dismissing the woman who had held his hand through the night. The order was a bucket of icy water. The bridge they had built felt suddenly fragile, swaying over a chasm of old suspicions and new betrayals. She stood, her body stiff, her gown a crumpled, bloody mess. She inclined her head, the perfect picture of obedient royalty. "As you command." She walked to the door, feeling both their gazes on her back. Lysander's calculating, Kaelen's unreadable. As her hand touched the iron latch, his voice stopped her, softer now, but no less a command. "Aeliana," she turned. "Change the gown," he said, his eyes tracing the dark stains. "Wear the silver one?" The one with the wolves embroidered at the hem. It was not a romantic request. It was a political one. The silver gown was a gift from his court, a symbol of her adoption into his world. To wear it to council after a night spent covered in his blood in his bed was a statement. It said, "The queen stood with the king. She is of us." It was protection, and it was a claim. She met his stormy eyes and gave a single, slow nod. Then she left, closing the door on the king and his scheming cousin, the scent of moonwort and blood clinging to her, and the ghost of his grip still warm on her hand. The corridor outside was empty and cold. The bond in her chest, which had been so quiet, now throbbed with a new, complicated pain. He had let her go to face the wolves of his court, but he had clothed her in their skin. She understood the calculation. It was the same cold logic that had made him drink the sleeping draught. But as she walked back to her rooms, the memory of his raw, fevered voice echoed in her mind. "The fire! In the bond! It burns." He knew she knew, and he had not denied it. The game had changed. The quiet, rejected queen was now a player in the deadly politics of his court and the king. Her greatest adversary and her only ally was watching her from a burning room, waiting to see what she would do next. The silver gown was a weight of expectation. The embroidery of running wolves along its hem felt less like decoration and more like chains, each stitch a subtle claim on a loyalty she was still struggling to define. Her maid had washed the blood from her skin and braided her hair into a severe, regal crown, but nothing could scrub away the memory of the night, the heat of his skin, the desperation in his grip, the terrifying honesty in his fever. The council chamber was a cavern of tense silence when she entered. The high-backed chairs around the obsidian table were filled with the kingdom's most powerful, grizzled generals, shrewd merchants, and ancient nobles whose families had schemed long before Kaelen's line took the throne. All conversation died as she walked to her seat beside the empty, carved throne of the king. Lysander, already seated, offered her a thin, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your Grace, you look restored." She ignored him, settling into her chair, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The bond was a silent, watchful thread, stretching taut toward the doors behind the throne. He was coming. She could feel the focused, simmering anger building through the connection, a far cry from the chaotic pain of before. This was a controlled burn. The doors swung open. Kaelen entered. He moved with a deliberate, powerful grace that barely concealed his injury. He wore a high-collared black tunic that hid the bandages, but the pallor of his skin and the faint tightness around his eyes betrayed him. He did not look at her. He took his throne, his presence immediately sucking the air from the room, replacing it with a frost of absolute authority. "Report," he said, the single word cutting through the silence. Captain Rylan, Evander's superior and the head of the royal guard, stepped forward. His face was grim. "The prisoners from the Shadowfang clan are defiant. They claim they were hired. Paid in southern silver to intercept the hunt and send a message." A murmur rippled through the council. Southern silver pointed to the Southern Pack, whose trade agreement had just been a point of contention. It was too neat. Alina's senses prickled. "Who hired them?" Kaelen's voice was deadly calm. "They do not know a name, only that the intermediary was one of ours. Someone within the castle walls who knew the hunt's route." The accusation, now explicit, settled over the table like a shroud. Eyes, carefully averted, seemed to drift toward her end of the table. "The route," Kaelen said, steepling his fingers, "was known to this council, to my personal guard, and to my household." His gaze, finally, swept across them all, lingering on no one, but the implication was clear. It landed on her, a tangible weight. Every person in this room had the knowledge to orchestrate this. A lord from the Western Marsh dared to speak. "With respect, Your Majesty, some had more to gain from instability than others." His eyes flickered toward Aeliana. A Sylvan queen, her people restless under the crown, would benefit greatly from a king's death and the chaos that would follow. A hot spike of anger shot through her, but before she could formulate a rebuttal, Kaelen spoke. "Indeed," he said, his tone conversational, almost bored. "My death would create a power vacuum. My heir is unborn. The line of succession would be contested." He turned his head, slowly, until his storm-gray eyes locked directly onto Aeliana. The entire room held its breath. "Tell me, Queen Aeliana, in the event of my death, who would your people support? Which of my squabbling cousins would the Sylvan backs bend for?" It was a public inquisition, a test. The bridge between them groaned under the pressure. She felt the eyes of the room, hungry and judgmental. Lysander watched with barely concealed anticipation. Aeliana met Kaelen's gaze. She saw the challenge there, but also deep within the storm. A flicker of something else, a demand for truth. Not the political kind, but the raw, dangerous kind they had touched in the sick room. She rose from her seat. The movement was smooth, dignified. "The Sylvan people," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "are not a coin to be spent in your succession wars, Your Majesty. They are subjects of this crown. My crown." She placed a gentle but deliberate emphasis on the possessive. "My loyalty is not to a bloodline, but to the stability of the realm I now call home. Your death would bring not liberation, but a fire that would consume my forests and your cities alike. I have no interest in ashes." She paused, letting her words hang. "As for the root, anyone with access to the royal archives could have pieced it together from historical hunting logs. The knowledge was not locked in my mind. It was written on parchment, available to any who knew where to look." Her gaze swept meaningfully toward Lysander, whose role included oversight of the castle's records. His smile vanished. Kaelen watched her unblinking. The tension in the room was a live wire. Then he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was not absolution. It was acknowledgement, a recognition of her parry. "The archivist and all scribes with archive access will be questioned," he declared, shifting the suspicion away from her with a king's casual decree. "Thoroughly." His eyes, however, remained on Lysander for a beat too long. The council launched into a debate about retaliation against the Southern Pack, a move Aeliana knew would be a disastrous overreach. She listened, her mind racing. The pieces were not fitting. The Southern Pack was opportunistic, not stupid. An assassination attempt with hired knives was too crude, too easily traced, unless the goal was not assassination. The thought struck her with cold clarity. The goal was suspicion. To sow discord, to point fingers at the queen, to make the king look vulnerable and his court treacherous. To destabilize from within. The Shadowfang were mercenaries. They had done their job. They had wounded the king, physically and politically. They had almost succeeded in making him turn on her in front of his entire council. As the arguments droned on, she felt a tug through the bond. Not pain, not anger. A focused, deliberate pull. She looked up. Kaelen was watching her, his expression inscrutable. Then he shifted his hand on the arm of his throne, his fingers tracing a slow, deliberate pattern. A circle, then a line through it. The ancient sigil for shadow and false. He saw it too. He knew the attack was a feint, a shadow play. And he was telling her. The meeting adjourned with a decision to increase border patrols, but withhold open war, a cautious, unsatisfying result that left the nobles grumbling. As the council filed out, Kaelen remained seated. Queen Aeliana. A word. Lysander hesitated at the door, his eyes sharp, but Kaelen's dismissive glance sent him on his way. The great doors boomed shut, leaving them alone in the vast, echoing chamber. He did not speak immediately. He stood, wincing only slightly, and walked to the massive window that overlooked the training yards. "You spoke well," he said, his back to her. "I spoke the truth. A dangerous commodity in this room." He turned, leaning against the stone sill. The daylight etched the lines of fatigue and pain on his face, but his eyes were acutely alive. The moon worked. The cache. "You left a trail, Aeliana. A subtle one, but a trail nonetheless for those who wish to follow it. You would have me let you die to cover my tracks? I would have you be more careful." The words burst from him, sharp with a frustration that felt intimately personal, not regal. He pushed off the sill, taking a step toward her. "You think the game is only out there? With the Southern Pack and the Shadowfang? The most dangerous knife is the one already inside the sheath. You have made yourself a target. Not just as a Sylvan, but as mine." The possessiveness in the words, so different from his cold "my queen," stole the air from her lungs. The bond surged in response, a sweet, painful ache. "I have always been a target," she whispered. "Not like this." He closed the distance between them until she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could feel the heat of his body, still weakened but potent. "Yesterday, you were the rejected wife, a political ornament. Today," his gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, searing in its intensity. "Today, you are the queen who stood down my council, who commands her own guards, who knows ancient secrets. Today, you are a threat, and an asset." His voice dropped, becoming a rough, private sound. "And I can no longer pretend the bond is a political inconvenience." Her heart hammered against her ribs. The sleeping draft suggested otherwise. He flinched as if struck. The raw truth of it lay bare between them. He looked away, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "The draft?" he said, each word dragged from a place of deep shame, was a failure. "A coward's solution. It doesn't stop the fire. It only makes you a prisoner inside it." He looked back at her, his eyes blazing with a confession. "I could feel you. Every night. A pull. A whisper. A need. It was a distraction I could not afford. Or so I told myself. And now?" Her voice was barely audible. "Now," he said, his hand rising, hovering beside her face, as it had in the courtyard. This time he did not brush her cheek. He cupped it. His palm was warm, calloused, terrifyingly gentle. "Now I've seen you stand in the heart of the storm I created. I have felt your quiet. It is not a distraction, Aeliana. It is a compass." The touch undid her. The honesty shattered her last defenses. A single tear escaped, tracing a path over his thumb. He watched its progress as if it were a miracle. "The poison in the bond?" she began. "I will stop," he vowed, his thumb catching the tear. "It is a sickness, one I chose. I will find another way. A better way. But it will require—" He hesitated, the king warring with the man. "It will require you, not as a silent partner in a political union, but as a true mate. It will require trust. And that is the thing I have in shortest supply." She leaned into his hand, the gesture an answer in itself, You asked me to bear loneliness. I am asking you to bear trust. We are both carrying impossible weights, Kaelen. Perhaps we can set them down. Together. For a long moment they stood there, frozen in the cathedral silence of the empty council chamber, his hand on her face, the bond between them, singing a clear, resonant note for the first time, unpoisoned and full of terrifying potential. The moment was shattered by a frantic pounding on the chamber doors. They sprang apart, the king and queen snapping back into place. "Enter!" Kaelen barked. Captain Ryland burst in, his face ashen. "Your Majesty, the prisoners, the Shadow Fang in the lower cells, they're dead." Kaelen's eyes turned to ice. "How?" "Poison, in their evening rations. Delivered by a guard whose body was just found in the moat. He had southern silver in his pocket, another damning piece of evidence, a silencing. The trail once again pointing south. But Aeliana saw the grim understanding in Kaelen's eyes. This was not a conclusion. It was a frame being nailed shut around a false narrative. He turned to her, and in his gaze she saw the cliffhanger of their story, personal and political, twist into a single sharp point. "The knife in the sheath," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "It just moved. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.